Hi guys! It has been a very long time since I've done one of these videos, especially a video that is just Guild Wars 2 related, so I'm going to actually open with a Guild Wars 2 build video over the condition spec that I run on my Revanant. So we're going to first start with the specializations. I'm going to go through this as if you guys have never played a Revanant before, so I'm going to break down what each specialization actually does, and then we are going to get into the stances and then into the armor. Moreover, we're going to get into the armor, then a little bit on the stances. So the first specialization is Devastation. This is your main damaging one for raw damage, like a Zerker build, but you also want to take it when you're running a condition build like this. Your base traits are Mutilate Defenses, Targeted Destruction, and Focused Siphoning. Mutilate Defenses will add vulnerability has a 25% chance to inflict vulnerability onto the target, which then increases incoming damage to that target for both raw damage and condition damage. And this spec is basically based around keeping up around 20 to 25 stacks of that vulnerability on your own, so that when you're roaming in the open world or even just doing anything else, you have those stacks up there and you're basically free to just completely melt the target. The next one is Targeted Destruction, which has an increased damage dealt to targets with vulnerability by 7%. This means instead of dealing that 1 damage increase instead, you have 8 damage that you have increased to vulnerable targets, which is going to only help in the long run. The last one is Focus Siphoning, which means you are siphoning health from targets to yourself if they have vulnerability on them, and that's every time you strike them. So you're basically gaining 57 health and dealing 67 base damage to them every time you hit them. The traits that you are going to want to take are Furious Strikes, which increases the ferocity when you're dual wielding, and this is basically all the ferocity that you're going to be getting is the plus 150, and that is because you are wielding a mace and an axe, so you are technically dual wielding. The next one is Assassin's Presence, which increases the ferocity of nearby allies. So it's basically like Spotter on a ranger, except for instead of it doing precision, it's doing the ferocity. The next one is Swift Termination. This increases damage to targets below the health threshold. Now the health threshold says 50%, but it's below the health threshold, so it's meaning, say, 49%. Instead of 50%, and you have an increased damage of 20% when they are below half health, which just means that they're going to melt even faster the lower health that they get. Your next specialization is Corruption. This one is your Condi specialization. It is basically the one that you're going to take to get that condition damage and pulse it out. You want your base traits are Rampant Vex, Opportune Extraction, and Yearning Empowerment. Rampant Vex has a chance to apply more Torment, which is your main condition as a Revenant, onto the target each time you hit with a crit. So it's only 33% chance, and you have to hit a crit to be able to get it, but it's an extra Torment, which you don't need to actually worry about too much because you're going to be applying a lot of Torment, so that one extra stack is very helpful when it comes up, but you don't need to worry about it. Opportune Extraction. You steal boons when you inflict torment on a foe affected by at least the threshold stack of torment, and it says that the threshold stack is 4, and since it says at least the threshold, it means directly at 4 stacks of torment you can start siphoning boons from people. So you only steal 1 boon, so don't go bragging about that to a necromancer. They will probably look at you funny, saying, no, you're not as good as I am at stealing boons. The next one is Yearning Empowerment, and Torment deals damage and lasts longer. Deals more damage and lasts longer. So it has an increased damage of 20%, which is amazing because, hey, it's an increased damage of 20%, especially when they're not moving. And the duration is increased by 20%, which is a flat out increase to it, which gets it from a average of 30% increase to 50%, which is just amazing. The traits that you want to take are Venom Enhancement, which is your only way to get poison. So every time you apply Torment, you are also applying poison, and the poison is going to last longer. But instead of it being the 20% increase, it is a 50% increase. So it has the flat duration of 50%, and this is your only access to poison, and will keep stacking as you apply that torment to the target. The next one you want to take is Abyssal Chill, which every time you chill a foe, you inflict torment on them. And it's 2 stacks of torment. And you have 2 skills that apply chill. You have your Axe, Frigid Blitz, and your Facet of Elements, which applies 2 pulses of chill. So that is 6 stacks of torment. Your next one is Diabolical Inferno, which burns nearby foes whenever you use your elite. So burn is going to be one of your main damage dealers, next to torment. Burn is no small joke. 1 stack is pretty amazing in and of itself, and this one does 2. So whenever you use, say, Facet of Chaos is off of cooldown and you use that, it'll apply 2 stacks. But the main thing to use it with, don't get me wrong, you still want to use your Facet of Chaos, is Embrace the Darkness, because that way you're also applying Torment as each time it pulses, Blind, and you get an extra Blind and a chance to apply 2 stacks of Burn.
Our moment has finally come.
The last one you're going to take is your Elite Specialization Herald. That one has the base traits of Facet of Nature, Vigorous Persistence, and Envoy of Sustenance. The first one, Facet of Nature, gives you the Facet of Nature and allows you to equip a shield. You can use the Facet of Nature, and I actually do attempt to use it a couple times during a comparison part of this video. And just keep in mind you can end up having your DPS suffer if you keep using the Facet of Nature. You can also use the Facet of Nature as a quick way to gain might and all the other boons that you gain here, which will tie in nicely to the end here. Vigorous Persistence, gain an increased endurance regeneration when you have an upkeep skill activated. All of these are upkeep skills within this. Also, Embrace the Darkness is an upkeep skill. So you are going to be having the increased skill endurance in combat by 25% regeneration, so you can dodge more, which means you can take less damage, which is amazing. Your last one is Envoy of Sustenance, so you have an increased wound duration of 15%, which helps whenever you swap in and out of Glint. That way you can keep your might going and stacking. The first trait you want to take is Radiant Revival. This I just always take because it's always nice to be able to revive more quickly. And basically you are placing a Facet of Light on the target you're reviving, so any damage incoming to them will only help heal them up faster. Which can be used actually in conjunction with the Facet of Light. If you are going into a toxic zone to try and heal them up, you activate the Facet of Light on you, you heal yourself up while you're healing them up faster because they're also taking ticking damage. You want to take Shared Empowerment because, as you can see, I currently have the Facet of Darkness activated, but it only grants me Fury, and each time it ticks, it's giving me another stack of might and keeping me around 3 stacks of might. However, if you turn that off, remove it, you end up not gaining another stack of might. So you want to keep that. Your next one is Elder's Force. This means every time you have an active boon on you, you have an increase of your damage by 2% per boon. Imagine it this way. Most people take a Sigil of Force on one of their weapons, which is a base flat increase of 5% damage. And if right now I have 2 boons on me, that is a flat increase of 4% damage. I activate this, it's 3 boons on me. That is an increase of 6% damage. I activate this. Refreshing. That is another increase of another 2% damage. We are up to 8% damage. That doesn't count. But say you activate your Facet of Chaos, you have all of these boons now on you. That is a total of 5 boons, 10% damage increase. That is basically 2 Sigils of Force. which you can't actually have equipped 2 Sigils of Force, so it's pretty cool that you can do that with a Revenant, just through taking that trait. So next up we have the gear. You're going to want to run full Vipers with Runes of the Berserker. Runes of the Berserker, the reason you want them is it's condition damage, main stat, with the minor being power, and a Revenant runs off of both power and condition for this build, because you want to keep that base power up so you're still dealing some damage. The last tier is 5% damage increase and 5% condition damage increase, which basically means you're running around with a Sigil of Force on your armor. For the weapons, you want to take, again, full Vipers. My axe and my mace are Vipers. You do not have to have a Viper staff, I just do because I like keeping the condition duration when I swap, and the only reason why it is Vipers is because of the fact it is a legendary. So, for the weapons, you want a Sigil of Bursting. The reason why I go with the Sigil of Bursting instead of a Sigil of Geomancy is when you are running with Geomancy, you get 6 stacks of bleeds, which is 700 damage per tick. It is a little bit of an increase, but it is so slight that it's barely noticeable, so I'd rather have an increase to my condition damage so that it's a total of like 11% increase to condition damage with the stacking with the armor, if it does stack. And then with the axe, I have a Sigil of Smoldering so that you have a increased duration for burning by 20%. And it's just a flat increase there. Over with the trinkets, you want everything basically Vipers except for 1 ring. The ring is going to be Sinister, and the reason being is because with your condition duration, after you also have the food, your poison is going to be at 100%. And I will show that to you guys. The food that you want to take is veggie pizza, probably the rare veggie pizza, not the flat veggie pizza, and a toxic focusing crystal. And with both those activated, the burning and torment are now at 76%, and the poison is at 100%. Now, the reason I have a staff is because of the fact your staff 5 here is your major break bar. And that way you are still being able to break bars instead of having to rely completely on your temporal rift, which will also break your break bar because of the confusion. The facet of elements, well, the confusion in the fact it displaces them, so it also breaks break bar because of that. Your facet of elements for the slow tick and your facet of chaos for a major one. That way you still have a very good solid way to break bars. So with the spec, you're actually going to find that you're staying pretty high in might, and that's because you use Chaos Fissure and then that and the Echoing Eruption, and the field effect is going to give you might because it is a burn field. Burn field combo field equals might. So again, 2, 3. So this is up for every 2 that this one is, so every other one that you have the Searing Fissure up, you want to use your Erupting Echo. That also applies another 5 stacks of Torment, and it will keep you going there. Also, you get some might from this, but you want to deactivate it quickly to be able to get those 20 stacks of vulnerability onto the target, and you also want to deactivate that quickly on the target so you get the 3 stacks of Burn, the 2 stacks of Chill, which add 2 more stacks of Torment onto the target, so that's a total of 4 stacks, and the 1 Pulse of Weakness. And that is basically how the build works. Now we're going to go on to the comparison of this build, well, the rotation of this build, and then compare it to others. So, hey guys, I am going to be doing a rotation to show you the rotation of this spec, and then show you it with 25 stacks of might, and then show you a little bit of how you would combat moving, because obviously certain things rely on fields and you want to be able to counter it. And then I'm going to do 2 comparisons to the spec, which is the general Zerker compared to it, and then the spec that you find on metabattle compared to it. I did actually already do all of this. I just forgot food on the Zerker spec, and I forgot a little bit on the other spec, which was just being able to keep up the rotation so that I would keep the 6 stacks of bleeds up. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the rotation of my spec first, which will be the same rotation used basically with all other Condi specs. So you want to open with 4, and then 2, 3. You want to always hit 2 and 3 in conjunction. 8, 7, 2.
Armored up.
Hit them. Swap. Keep up 2. Keep using 4. Now, you can also use facet of nature while doing this. Just be careful because you end up using a lot more of your energy while you're running this spec than you would normally. So I would end up delaying a little bit, unlike I just did, when you go into Malik before you hit your elite, because otherwise you run out of energy long before you end up being able to swap back to Glint. So delay until you're at least at 75% of your energy, and then you can use the Embrace the Darkness. That way you are able to keep up Facet of Nature and be a little bit more useful to your party. Also, remember use 8 whenever it's up too. So as I'm going to do here, I'm going to wait until I'm at least closer to 75%, which could take a little while, or at least until Glint is off of near cooldown, and then hit that. Go until I'm nearly out of energy. Swap. What takes a little bit away from the rotation is trying to activate all the facets. And I will be the first to admit that. Also, not having 25 stacks of might, it continually makes it go a little bit slower. But one thing you will notice is you stay fairly close to 100%, well, not 100, 25 stacks of vulnerability as long as you remember to use your facet. Your facet of strength, because it adds two strikes of 10 vulnerability. And then with the added vulnerability that you get for hitting things, you end up almost always in 20 to 25 stacks of vulnerability, which just makes the target completely melt. So, next up is with a continual 25 might on yourself. 25 stacks of might. And then the golem. So I'm always going to go with the weak golem because those are actually killable as one person. So as you can see there, that got us to 20. We're gonna get up to 25 fairly quickly. Of course, it'll go back down. Swap. Always remember to hit 3 when that field is up so that you are managing to stay within the field. Wait a little bit before you activate the facet, the Embrace the Darkness. So, unlike with the normal Zerker spec, your goal is not to keep pulsing out all but Fury. You want to keep pulsing out that Fury so that your party would have Fury. However, the main goal when you're in this spec here is to keep up the vulnerability and to keep pulsing out all the damage that you can possibly pulse out. So that way you are being as effective as you can be.
Now you shall witness true ultimate power.
Are you always going to hit things right on the mark? No, I don't all the time either. I mean, I think my best run time currently with this spec is time of 102.
Armored up.
And that was with me actually remembering that Glint's elite there exists, instead of continually forgetting that it exists. And as you can see, I just messed up with the facet of nature as it is. It's very easy to do that. So that actually took a little bit longer because I wasn't paying attention, but as I've said, my best time is 102 seconds. It's more because I was paying more attention to that. So we're going to do one final run.
Welcome. Feel free to approach the console and begin combat practice. If you have any questions, I'm all ears.
With a moving target mobility. So I'm going to show you how to combat mobility. You are a Revenant, so you get Torment, which is your main Condi as it is. But it's not going to continually be sitting in that field for the fire damage to be affected by it. The point is to keep up your rotation as if nothing was going on. Try and get all those stacks of vulnerability up. Try and get all those stacks of torment up. Try to get as many stacks as you possibly can of burning, which is still about 5 to 6 if you remember Glint is up. Keep using that. Do you have to run with the facet of nature? No. If you're uncomfortable using the facet of nature, don't use it. It does add a little bit more time to your run because you're constantly having to worry about your energy a lot more than you would be otherwise. However, you do end up with just as much damage actually as if you ran the spec from metabattle. The only problem with Revenants is getting moving targets to stay in your field. However, keep in mind also that when a target is moving, they are also taking more damage from Torment. So that was that spec running, and I had 104 that time, and that's with it moving. And that was just because I wasn't paying attention to the facet of nature. When you're trying to focus on the facet of nature, you will end up losing a little bit of DPS because of the fact you're trying to maintain the uptime of the facet of nature. However, you can end up being very useful to your team. Say if you're running this spec in a raid and you don't have another Revenant that is running the Zerker spec, you can run this spec and still have the ability to have facet of nature. It's just managing your energy correctly while you are doing that, because you will be consuming a lot more energy than a Zerker spec. So we are going to move on to a Zerker spec. We're only going to do a comparison with full food, which I didn't have food up this time, ironically, and 25 stacks of might. I probably ran out of the food. So I'm going to put on food for the last, for the next one. So I'll be right back. Hi, I am back. This is a actually different tune. It's my Sylvari. It was my original Revenant, and I'm going to be running the full spec as you would in a raid. So this is the Zerker spec. It's Sword Axe, and as you can see, it's the spec that you would run if you were playing a Zerker in a raid. So just a quick rundown. I'm in full Zerker with full Scholar runes. I have actually way more infusions, so I guess that's a little bit of cheating there, but oh well. Anyways, full everything there. So without further ado, let's just get this going. Activate the facet. You always want nature up on this, because the main point in any raid is the fact that you are bringing the facet of nature. Also, I do have food on, so well, you're bringing Facet in Nature and continuing also out Fury, so... Now you can also alternatively run Malix with the spec too, which I actually normally used to do. And I just screwed up. You're also supposed to keep the Facet of Might, the Facet of Strength up, so that you were pulsating out the Might, so... However, it doesn't really matter right now because it's not affecting my levels of Might. It is affecting my rotation a little bit because I'm not slowly going under glints, but the point being is you're supposed to camp glint anyways. And as you can see, you're staying close to around 8 to 11 stacks of vulnerability instead of the 25 that you could very easily get if you ran as the Condi build. My Condi build, more specifically.
Iron Hammer is ready.
The other Condi builds, you actually end up with a lot less of the vulnerability. And that is mainly because the spec that I choose to run ends up getting the vulnerability mainly from the Facet of Strength, and thus, yeah, I have a feeling that I did that for the heck of it. It's like, this is taking forever.
Iron Hammer is ready to strike.
So, it went down. We were at 112. The time was 112, which is a lot better than the last time I did, but I also threw out that guy, which added to the damage, which you're not actually supposed to do unless you're trying to break the break bar. So, basically speaking, for this spec, you end up just doing 1, 2, every now and again throw out Facet of Elements, which I just do as an added flare. You're actually not supposed to do that because it wastes energy. And use your break bars, swap, use the
Iron Hammer is ready to
use the
strike.
active that's on that until it's fully down, and then swap, and you just keep swapping. That is the point of the spec. You're there for the Facet of Nature and to be the break bar monkey. So we are going to swap back over to my other Revanant, swap over to the metabattle build, and compare it to my build. So first, understand there's going to be a very slight difference because I actually do have food up with the metabattle build where I didn't have food up with my build. So it's going to be a very slight difference there just because of that. And the metabattle build is using Invocation full top tier. And the last difference is going to be in the sigil on the weapon. Now, it is a slightly different weapon. It's still Vipers, just not with a pretty skin. And you have the sigil of Geomancy. This is going to keep around 6 stacks of bleed on the target at any given time. But keep in mind, bleed is a fairly weak condition when you compare it to, say, burning. So 6 stacks of bleed versus 5 stacks of burning is going to be a very slight difference. It might not even make up for anything, but we shall see. You do end up with a slightly higher, like 1-2 stacks more burning with this build than my build. But you also end up with less upkeep of might. So if I tested this both without the full 25 stacks of might, you would end up seeing a drop in the level of might that you gain because you're only gaining it through the 2-3. So without further ado, let's get started. Open. So, as you can see, the second I swap, there's 3 stacks. And if I keep this up and watch closely for the cooldown, swap, we're at 6 stacks. Remember to always keep 2 up, no matter what Condi build that you are running.
The great dwarf's
Still,
power
we're still
is
at 6
upon you
stacks.
all.
And we have way less vulnerability. Swap.
Rising.
You also have to really keep in remembering to swap with this one because that's the only way you're going to gain bleeds. is through swapping. However, I would camp Malik's until you're nearly out of energy, simply because it's a little bit more damage.
Iron Hammer is ready to strike.
One thing about this spec, it has less mobility, but it has a lot more survivability. Simply because that is the way the Legendary Dwarf stance works. You end up with your most massive heal, and you end up with a very good elite, which adds a lot stone armor to you. So basically you're harder to kill. So I ended up screwing up my spec quite a bit when I was running it, because it had, wherever it's at, 104, but it was still a second better than a perfect or near perfect rotation of the metabattle. So my best run with my spec was 104, but that was also moving, whereas my best run with it on my previous run was 102, and it's about the same steady-wise if you end up doing a perfect rotation with both of them. So it's about 105 to 105 time-wise in comparison. So it just depends on your preference when it comes down to what Condi build you want to run. Do you want to actually be a herald and run around and have speed, or do you want to survive certain situations a little bit better and worry more about weapon swapping? Or, I guess, instead of weapon swapping, legend swapping. So, one last look at the build that I made. Why did I go out of equipment? Just keep in mind, it is about even, which is a good thing. I also wasn't running with food by mistake, so, and I don't feel like re-recording this a third time. So, it's basically a combination of the spec that you would run normally with a Zerker, and the spec that you would run as a Condi dealer. So these two are Condi. Well, that's Condi. That's not Condi. And basically you end up with a little bit more power increase because of the boons, and you do have more boons on you instead of just, say, might or retaliation if you use your heal, and stability if you use that. But the likelihood that you're going to use this, so instead of having, say, 4% of that, you end up with, because you have swiftness, you can end up with regen on you. You have the protection granted by glint, so you can end up with the regen if you're using your heal skill. You have might, you have the swiftness granted by elements, you have fury constantly on you because you don't exactly waste that unless you're swapping over to Malik, and you have protection whenever you use Facet of Chaos. So at your height, you get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10% more damage than you would if you were otherwise using it. Now, you can also run a combination of the two specs. Say if you really, really, really want those 6 bleeds, which, keep in mind, 6 bleeds versus 6 stacks of torment versus, say, 6 stacks of burning is a big difference. 6 bleeds is very small condition damage. Bleeds are some of the smallest Condi damage out there. It's just, generally speaking, you have more of it being stacked on a target, thus it's good. However, you're a Revanant, you can only get a max of 6 on a target, so it's nowhere near as good as, say, running all your torment and making sure your torment is constantly up, or making sure all your burns are up. Having more burns, having more torment is better. And having more chill allows you to get more torment onto the target by 2 more stacks of torment. So every time you're basically dropping the facet of elements, you end up with another 2 pulses of chill and a pulse of chill there. So you get 3 chills, which is 6 torment versus getting 6 stacks of bleed if you run with that. Or you end up with the 6% extra Condi damage, and It's just extra combat damage. So it is personal choice, whatever you guys want to try there, but I personally prefer running with glint versus running without glint. Thank you guys for enduring that very long video, and I am sorry it was so long. I am off to set up the other video for the last spec I want to run and show Revenants can run. Thank you for watching. This is Flaming80 signing out.